Most people don't realize how much of their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making millions pulling details about you from public records and the internet, then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance, all backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might just sell credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/hidden. Protect yourself now at aura.com/hidden.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to ADHD BCE, the podcast foraging through space and time to uncover the many positive ways neurodiversity has impacted the human story. From our earliest ancestors, neurodiversity has helped shape the world we live in, and on this show, we're going to be diving into some of the most enigmatic and significant events, places, and people that have driven humanity from simple tree dwellers to space-travelling entrepreneurs. I'm your late-diagnosed neurodivergent host, George Lomas, and I'll be interviewing archaeologists, academics, and neurodiversity specialists in this quest to prove that being on the spectrum is something we can be very proud of. So let's make like ADHD and jump right in. So in today's episode, I'm going to be taking a bit of a risk and inviting on my therapist, who is the lovely Kathy Charlton. Welcome, Kathy.
Hello.
So Kathy is a counsellor and psychotherapist with a particular interest in ADHD in relationships. Kathy also happens to be a fantastic therapist, and she works for a company called Head Stuff ADHD Therapy, who are one of the largest groups of counsellors, coaches and specialists in ADHD and ASD in the UK. And from personal experience, I found those guys online and they got me my diagnosis back in 2020, and that's where I met Kathy. If you remember back then, a long way back when COVID was a thing and it was horrible. Do you remember that, Kathy?
Yeah, and online became the norm.
That's right. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I think that was my first real experience with Zoom actually back then. But so Kathy, we're going to jump into neurodiversity today. Rather than being archaeology heavy, which some of the episodes have been, this is more about neurodiversity. So could you please give us a little introduction about yourself and your relationship with neurodiversity?
Yeah, okay. So I think it's important to say that it is a particular interest rather than quoting that I'm a specialist of any form. And the reason being is because during my training to be a counsellor and then psychotherapist and then relationships counsellor, it's actually been a journey within the family that I currently live in and also grew up in. During my initial training, my youngest was struggling at school. We also, it was just pre-COVID, and he got his diagnosis of ADHD. And then it kind of opened my eyes. I had to obviously learn an awful lot about it. I had no idea just how prevalent it was in my own family. And then I left an article open on the table in the BACP's Therapy Today magazine. And my husband read it. It was written by Sarah Templeton, who incidentally runs Head Stuff ADHD Therapy. And he went, "Oh my God, that's me." So, okay. Then we began to discover how it can be inherited very easily. It's very much, if one member of the family has it, it's quite often that other members have got it too. And then again, the more we knew about it, the more we realised a second child also has ADHD, but a very different kind, identifies and behaves in a very different way. And then we also discovered ASD. So, and the more we look at it, the more I can see it in my own family background, and the more we can see it in my husband's family background. And also between the two of us, we've now got a family of ADHD and ASD. That's how we describe our family. And we love being that way too.
That's great to hear. It's funny, isn't it? You open up kind of worms when you start picking one ADHD strand in the family. It tends to go a lot deeper and further into the family history. And I suppose as well, I mean, I know with my own experience with that, it starts to make a lot of sense when you realise that it's not necessarily. Well, Kathy, you're not actually ADHD, are you? You're one of the few members of your family who aren't.
Yeah, which is another anomaly. I don't get away completely scot-free, and I think this is why there needs to be a lot more research into both ASD and ADHD, simply because I struggle a little bit with time blindness. And yet I don't have all of the other lists that you would normally go through with regards to, the checklist that you would need to have if you were then to be diagnosed.
Yeah, the common traits.
Absolutely, yeah. So I don't have the same kind of executive function issues or kind of differences to maybe the rest of my family. So I'm the organizer and the planner in my house, because it's not something that becomes very easily to other members, practicalities, that kind of thing. So it's an odd one. I don't know why I'm not, but yeah, I feel like the odd one out, actually.
You want to be in the club?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It depends what's going on around the table at dinner.
Yeah. No, I get that. Yeah, it's always interesting. I think with families and ADHD, it's always a very personal experience, because there can be a lot of baggage there and a lot of preconceptions and a lot of judgment as well. I mean, from personal experience, growing up undiagnosed, I mean, it wasn't even a thing, ADHD. Obviously, as this podcast is striving to prove, it's always been there, but it wasn't understood. So in the environment of 20th century, mine was rural Derbyshire, that was my experience, and you see yourself as the problem, you see yourself as the black sheep of the family, and deep down that you're not the only one who displays certain traits. But even so, by the time you get to adolescence, you have a very poor view of yourself, and you end up. Well, I mean, from my point of view, I went through quite a tumultuous adolescence and early adulthood. Some of it I loved, most of it I hated, and it wasn't until I got my diagnosis that I realised. Well, I was like 38, I think, when I got my diagnosis back in 2020. I can't remember. Again, I can't do numbers, so I might be way off on that, even on my own age. But I suppose what I'm trying to get at is, when you get the diagnosis, you get the understanding, you get the knowledge that it's not your fault, but there is something going on there, and that can be quite an emotional thing. How did that work out with you guys? Did it bring a little bit of peace and quiet, or did it help a little bit, or did it help enormously?
I suppose it's on mixed fronts, and obviously I can't speak for every single member of my family, and obviously other friends and family that I have, or even clients. But one of the things I think is really important with a diagnosis is it helps you look back and join the dots, because there might be significant things that have happened in your life, and you think, oh my goodness, I now have an understanding, have a reason. I get it. I know what was now going on for me. And also it does give you some information. So it gives you almost like a keyword. You start talking the same language as what's out there for information. So once you have that particular term, you can then research it. You can find out. You can actually get a lot of information. So it can also help you feel like you belong to a group of people. And I think belonging is partly. Often what I hear about with ADHD and ASD is being other or on the outside or different.
Yeah.
Well, actually, when you understand that you belong maybe to a kind of another category, and that you're not too much or not enough, that's okay, because actually you may be with the wrong tribe. Yeah. Which maybe links into your archaeology aspect here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't remember where I read this. It was a few years ago, where the domino effect of one person in the family getting diagnosed and somebody else gets diagnosed, and you look at great uncle whoever who was very eccentric and somebody who had a very terrible life, and a lot of the maladaptive behaviours they were displaying were symptomatic of neurodiversity, and you get this, and you also get the grief as well of looking back and thinking what could have been if you'd have just known. Because one of the things we don't talk about a lot, or enough, I don't think, is because obviously we want to sort of celebrate ADHD and autism and neurodiversity, and we do want to do that in this podcast, but we also have to recognise the fact that there comes with it, especially with being undiagnosed, a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of hatred, a lot of self-hatred. Even now, with all the awareness I have now, thanks to yourself, Kathy, and other healers and specialists, I still find myself doing it, that I'll blame myself for any mistake that I make. And it might be a stupid mistake, it might be a simple mistake, but that voice that comes through is very strong. The judgment that you have against yourself for making those mistakes, it's... And
I wonder then if that's because of maybe not appreciating quite where you fit in the world and how you see the world's actually okay. And it often, late diagnosis, I think, brings all of that, as you've just described. And so I suppose that's one of the reasons why we're trying to champion getting kind of diagnosis, but also screening as early as possible. And then you can actually stop the issues kind of coming into the school and also, beyond, because obviously a lot of people with ADHD often find themselves excluded from school for various different reasons because it's not being picked up. They just see the behaviour as negative or bad. And then you end up with a kind of exclusion through the school into the prison pipeline. That's one of the things we're trying to avoid as well. So, everything you describe, you've been fortunate maybe that you've had some positive people in your life that's kind of helped you get to where you are now, rather than it going down a more challengingly, possibly destructive route.
Oh, absolutely. I was very fortunate growing up. I mean, I hated a lot of isolation, because that's what my life was. I grew up in a hamlet, and there was just nobody my age. There was nothing going on. It was a nightmare for a busy ADHD at that age. And I got in trouble. I did things wrong. And the typical ADHD behaviours, if you don't mind me saying it. I think I would say that if I was brought up in a city, I'd have really struggled. I think I would have got in with the wrong people. I think I would have ended up down that route. So I'm very grateful and lucky to have grown up in rural Derbyshire. But it's a slippery slope, and it's such a tragedy as well that all these maladaptive behaviours and all the negative internal processing ends up with so many issues and so many problems that are only there because the world is structured in certain ways that don't bring out the best in the neurodiverse in general. I think we struggle. I mean, ADHD itself, I've got ADHD and autism and God knows what else. So I know I can feel them battling out my special interests and my love of routine and my hatred of routine and my need for stimulation and my need for peace. They battle it out, and it's a really difficult thing to navigate when you're undiagnosed. As soon as you get that diagnosis and you can start to see the strands coming together, and you realize that one element of you has certain needs and the other aspect of you has other desires and requirements, and it gets really tricky, doesn't it? And I think what we could do in a few moments is have a chat about some of these terms and try and clarify them a little bit, so that people like myself who happen to be neurodivergent and have a diagnosis or don't have a diagnosis, that's not necessary. It's really important in certain settings like school and work and so on. But if you're neurodivergent, you're neurodivergent. You just are. It's not something we need to worry about in terms of clarifying whether or not you have a piece of paper or not. You don't need that piece of paper, but if you have it, great. But yeah, I think they're all quite commonly discussed certainly on social media, the more negative aspects of neurodivergence. And I think really in this podcast, what we're looking to do, we're looking for the positives, and there is an awful lot of that. So if you just take the idea that in the modern setting, we are struggling. Neurodivergent people are struggling a lot, and it's understandable. It's not a blame thing. It's not we need a revolution thing. It's just we need to understand this so that we can change things. And I think it's important to look at ADHD, autism, all sorts of neurodivergence as something that is genetically inherited. This is something millions of years in the making. You know, you didn't just pop out of the factory and you hadn't been made properly. That's not how it works. You are exactly how you are supposed to be. You are exactly who you are supposed to be. And in the right environment, that is a totally different game. And that's something I want to talk about later on in the podcast, in this episode, sorry. We want to go back and think about different times, different periods when being neurodivergent was an absolute blessing. And I'm sure there were periods and times and moments when there was madness and trouble and problems and maladaptive behaviours, of course, because the human story is incredibly volatile. There's been some horrific events from nature, from humans, from all sorts of areas. And that will have caused a tremendous amount of trauma and difficulty. And I think having highly sensitive nervous system, which a lot of us have in neurodiversity, is going to cause all sorts of trouble. So someone like you, Kathy, would have had a job throughout the human past. You know, it's never been totally easy, but in the context of this episode, we're talking about environments, and the modern environment is particularly challenging. Schools, work, relationships, the internet. It's a bit of a nightmare if you don't know what's going on, or if you've not developed a proper understanding of who you are and where you're at. So I think we're going to take a little break now, but when we come back, I'm going to ask Kathy to talk about neurodiverse terms, and we're going to look at applying those later in the episode to various places in the past and see how different that would have been, those experiences. So we were talking then about having some experiences of having ADHD and diagnosis, and we did talk about some of the negative or more negative aspects and maladaptive behaviours that come with being undiagnosed and in difficult environments. And we try to mention the positive side of it as well, which we haven't really got into yet. But I think in general, it would be good to talk about neurodiversity and not so much the terms or the definitions, but the language used around it and how we view it. Yeah. Kathy, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, so one of the things I think I pick up on quite quickly is the use of neurodivergence and neurodiversity. They are actually quite different. So we generally saying neurodiverse. So neurodiverse or neurodiversity, we all are, because we're so different. It's the human condition. We're all diverse in the way that we think. We all have different experiences that impact on how diverse we are in our brains. But actually the neurodivergence is what is more coined for ADHD and autism or ASD. So I think that's sometimes helpful to clarify, because we're all diverse, but it's the divergence, I think, is what we're talking about here with those two.
Yeah, so as an umbrella term, I suppose, neurodiversity, neurotypicals are within that umbrella as well. It's everybody, every human being that's ever lived is neurodiverse, but only those on the spectrum essentially are neurodivergent. Yeah.
And the other thing that I often come across is misunderstanding who can actually be ADHD, because there's the old, I suppose, adage, it's a naughty boy syndrome, ADHD. And actually, there's different types of ADHD. And so, you've got the inattentive, the hyperactive, which is the one that's more readily seen, especially in young children, and then the combined, which is, those two together. So again, this is one of the important things that happened in my family, which was, it was very apparent because it was quite obvious when it came to the hyperactive or the combined child. But it wasn't until we actually got more information and we delved into it that we realized that inattentive is very much part of the same, sphere of that neurodivergence, which is ADHD.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because, obviously we need a framework of understanding and categories to help define and understand and hopefully, not heal, make better. From your family's perspective and from my own experience, what I found as well, we need this framework, we need the categories, but they're not sort of yardsticks. They're not there to sort of gauge. They are in terms of getting a diagnosis and so on, but what it doesn't do is show the fluidity of these comorbidities. So for myself, I am combined. So I have moments of being inattentive and moments of hyperactivity, and I don't really get much say in that. It's the same. Things like hyperfocus and so on, they come in as a separate thing to that. But the diagnosis itself is really helpful, but it also doesn't really tell the full story, does it? It doesn't give you all these details of individual. The saying of you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Same with ADHD. Yeah. We're all different anyway, and we're on a sliding spectrum, and it's down environment and all sorts of factors come into play with that. So I think that probably highlights how difficult it can be, or easy it can be, to be misdiagnosed.
Yeah. Also, why it can sometimes only happen at certain stages of your life as well, because it can evolve. You don't grow out of ADHD or you don't grow into it. It actually is, it just can kind of seem slightly different or nuanced as you grow through your life as well. Hormones will have a lot to play in females, for example. Puberty impacts the brain as well. So that's going to kind of change the way that you might behave or seem to be behaving, to others, and also your relationship with yourself grows and evolves, doesn't it? As you kind of go through your life stages. Yeah.
Yeah. With with all this in mind, it's understood anyway, but I think it's important to talk about this. When we talk about ADHD, for example, and we talk about so many aspects of having ADHD and that lived experience, we talk about the environment and how challenging it is. So if we go sort of birth through life, for example, so born into challenging circumstances, that stimulates the nervous system anyway. You know, there's been, I can't remember where I read this, but there was some research there's been a lot of research, on when you're having a baby, if your circumstances are challenging, that's going to impact the child within the womb and at birth and so on. So if it's a volatile world that you're born into, that's going to impact how your ADHD manifests, because you've got this incredible brain, you've got this incredible nervous system, and it is wired and geared up for life. And if life isn't going well, or if it's challenging, that energy, that potential is going to be moved and pushed around in different ways. So when we talk about archaeology and ADHD, we're looking for, in this podcast, we're looking for markers, we're looking for traits of ADHD in a very positive way. From a counsellor's perspective, Kathy, you will know that there's not been it's very, what I'm trying to say is it's very easy to take this view that the modern world is very difficult and in the past it would have been easier to have ADHD. That's not true. It is true, but it's not the full story. It's not the full story. So there have been countless, every single human being goes through challenges. Nobody goes through life scot-free. That's not how it works. We're all put to the test. With ADHD in the modern setting, the test has been completely personal, completely inside of you, because you mask it, because you realize that you're the problem, or you get this belief that you are the problem. Or most of the other classes sat there looking at the board, writing down what they're supposed to write, happy days, even if they hate it, even if they're bored of it. We on the spectrum tend to struggle a bit more with that, and that can lead to all sorts of problems and self-belief problems. With environments impacting us so much. Where am I going with this? With the environment impacting ADHD the way it is it possible to, because it's really, really easy to sort of look at Tom Hartman's hunter-farmer theory, which came out in the 90s, I think, and proposed that ADHDers are the direct descendants of hunters or something along those lines. And I buy into it. I do. I think it's a really great and exciting idea. I love that notion. But obviously that might not be entirely accurate. We'll have to bring that one up in another episode. But for today, with the environment impacting ADHDers and autistic people so much, is there anything you think we could do in schools to help create or foster an environment that is more suited to the neurodivergent brain?
Well, I suppose what I need to clarify is I'm not an educational specialist. So but what I do find is it's quite narrow with regards to what we're trying to get children to fit into, so the kind of the academia, I think for a long time we've been fed quite recent and more kind of recent decades to, university. And actually there's an awful lot of people who are divergent, I should say, who actually do very well in those environments and actually academically excel, especially if you're going to look at things like autism and ADHD, where there's a hyper focus or a particular interest and it really propels them, and they become, experts in their field. But it's the other side, which is, when, academia is just not floating your boat, it's just not going to be your thing. And so you find generally, creative medias, so you've got kind of musicians, you have artists, you have dancers, people that like to move, and then you've got sports and athletes, people who are very good physically, and athletically. And also then, just anecdotally, in my own lived experience, when we established a inner city school where some of my family were, and we set up a school garden. The parents and teachers got together, and I noticed a particular child who struggled within the actual school environment, really didn't have a great track record, got the label, known as that child. And when we had him in the garden, he excelled. He really excelled. And to the point that we were able to give him, an actual kind of role. And he would then show other children some gardening tips or skills. And, he really excelled in that. And that was, he had a sense of pride and something that he really felt good about himself. And this is long before I had my understanding of what was going on in my family and during my training since. But even back then, when I look back at this child, I can't say that he was, because I'm not special, I'm not qualified to make a diagnosis. However, I do often think about that child thinking, I bet my career on it that he must have been and will be, ADHD of some description.
Okay, so I love that idea of the inner city garden, and I'm sure it wasn't just that one child that benefited from it, Kathy. Could you tell us a little bit more about how that came to be and the benefits you saw from it? So
one of the things that I can use my kind of knowledge now that I see come into my therapy room quite a lot, which when I look back now at the children and also that garden setting, is often I get this tug of war between two extremes. One is to say, I'm never enough. And then the opposite, which is the real dichotomy of ADHD and autism, is too much. I'm too much. I have too much emotion, but I don't have enough wherewithal to pay my bills on time, and it swings between the two quite heavily at times.
Yeah, I mean, the responsibility side of things, especially with executive dysfunction and rejection sensitivity dysphoria and so on, it's really challenging, isn't it? I'm just trying to imagine now, because I love doing this. I love to jump around time and space and use my imagination. And I wonder how many cases, how many instances there's been of ADHDers throughout the past, throughout millions of years, who have sat there feeling that they're not good enough or that they're too much. I don't think it's fair to say that it's just exclusively a modern problem. I suspect that throughout human history, there have been people suffering because they feel they're in the wrong environment, or maybe it's not just down to, when we talk about the environment, I'm not just talking about the setting, the weather and the climate and the surroundings. We're talking about the people they're with, the politics and the relationships that are going on around them. Now, with having a highly sensitive nervous system, or a super duper as a nervous system that is just brilliant at processing information, but it can't filter out information, so you're getting everything all at once and it's exhausting. These relationship-based issues and politics-based issues and whatever's going on around you at the time, it's not all going to be cave bears and saber-toothed tigers. It's also invading armies and pestilence and all sorts of issues. It's interesting to think about it, but where do we draw the line? Where do we say the modern world is unhealthy for ADHD in certain ways, and is, if you look at your inner city garden, the effect that had on that little child and on probably countless children who were there. Where do we say, how do we say that we need to do more in classrooms, more in work environments to allow the space, the time, the freedom, the room, whatever is required to enable neurodivergent people who aren't necessarily the best academics or the best athletes. They just want to be alive. They don't, there's a lot of this on social media about ADHD is the superpower, autism is the superpower, and those who are experiencing great deals of success are more recently Paris Hilton. Have you seen that yet, Kathy?
I haven't.
Oh my God, you need to see it. It's mind-blowing. Basically, this is a lovely segue here. We've gone off on a tangent, but basically, Paris Hilton's just dropped a video of her pop song about ADHD and having ADHD. And how you need to let Sarah Templeton know as well. I need
to ask the kids, because obviously they've got their finger on the pulse. It's great because they come and tell me things. As kids, my own family and friends and clients. But I suppose what you're talking about, if I'm understanding what you're saying, is that it's all about benchmarks, isn't it? We've got tables and benchmarks, and even from when the baby's born, we've got this graph of or graph I should say, my accent coming out, which way, whether the child is kind of growing quickly enough, have they got all of these skills, which is the macro and the micro, and I find that really interesting. And then we have tables of when you can kind of read and write, when you can do particular, skills or not skills, and I find that I find troubling. I know we need some kind of way of judging academia with regards to getting into university, but actually that is not the whole of life. And I think we need to really make sure that we're very careful about the benchmarking and the tools that we use to kind of measure people, to work out where they need to go in life. And sometimes it looks like you failed. Sometimes it looks like you've not quite managed a particular benchmark, and so you're not good enough. I think actually it just shows you that this is not the right avenue for you. There may be different avenues. And there's benchmarks everywhere. We've got unwritten rules. Often the classic is, I should know better, or I should have known, or I ought to do this a different way, or I ought not to be who I am. So again, we have society benchmarks as well, don't we, and standards of what we should and shouldn't be doing and being. So it creates a sense of shame, I think, as well, that, again, like you said, what I was saying at the beginning, that not good enough or not enough. It's about finding your own place in the world. There's a space for every single person. It's finding out what your space is.
I love that. Yeah,
looking at your own. It's your own race, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think it's this concept of the modern world being the problem. So I wonder if thousands of years ago, there were ADHDers out there who were looking at their tribe and the way things were done in their culture and thinking, this is wrong. I'm not a hunter and I'm not a gatherer. I'm an artist. God damn it. I'm going to go and do some cave paintings. I wonder how different it would have been to have exactly the same genetic package that we've got, because technically we can be transferable. We can move ourselves into any culture and assimilate more or less seamlessly. What I'm trying to say, no, I've forgotten what I was trying to say now. But we're basically sort of circling around the negative side of things again, and I want to bring it back to the positive. So obviously in hunter-gatherer settings, for example, or lots of other prehistoric cultures, being neurodivergent would, I think, have been less stressful in terms of social pressure to remember to do your taxes, do your paperwork, to pay the bills, to do all those sorts of things. I like to think that there was less immediate pressure. But then again, we did an episode recently on Theophrastus, his obtuse man, and in that this stereotyped ancient Athenian character was displaying all sorts of hilariously ADHD, I'm going to call it. I'm sorry if anybody's suffering with this at the minute, but those wonderful aspects of ADHD where I think Theophrastus' obtuse man, he put salt in his food twice. He was supposed to go to court and forgot about it and went to the countryside. So I'm sure there's countless examples of ADHD being a pain in the backside. Yeah. But it's nice to think about the positive aspects of neurodivergence and the creativity, the out-the-box thinking, the energy, the seeing the world from a different perspective. Yeah. Do you see more of that in school than you do the negative aspects, or do you see it as sort of a double-edged sword, and that the schools or even the pharmaceutical industry and the medical fields are focusing on the negatives because we're seeing it as a problem and not catering enough to the talents and potential?
I think it's a mixed bag, to be honest, because again, I'm going to speak about, anecdotally, I've seen children who are ADHD thrive in secondary school. But that's because they've maybe found a particular mentor, teacher, or subject they particularly like. So you think about what's driven you to do archaeology, George. I know school, you described it earlier in this episode of it not being the best place for you, but actually, something was there because it gave you the opportunity to study archaeology. There was a hook, and it got you in, and that became your kind of interest and your part of your career. So I think it's often to do with, from what you're describing when you talk about it in the past, I wonder if difference was more appreciated or allowed. So, you may not have had the strength of being somebody who, we didn't have to worry about taxes, but somebody would have had to think about the detail in certain groups. And then they had the big kind of idea thinkers about, taking maybe the tribe to the next location. Somebody had to, kind of think, right, is it worth the risk? And we're gonna have a go and we're gonna try it out. So, there are definitely lots of positives, and it comes out when it's allowed to shine, to blossom. So it might be in school, it might be in a particular subject, it might be in sports, it might be in creative medias and arts, it might be sciences, it might be about, who thought of putting us on the moon? Somebody had to have that thought. And at the time it would have been considered absolutely, bonkers and really, but eventually it became possible. So, we need that difference, and I think what is challenging is that we have a criteria, which is what focuses on the negative, because often with medication and support, it's done in a way that says, right, let's look at how it's impacting you and negatively kind of causing you problems in your life. Then you're going to get some help. And actually, wouldn't it be lovely if anybody who actually is screened and does have this neurodivergence, that they are going to get help regardless of whether it's negative or not. And actually is going to be kind of, well, let's do this because we need to make sure that we really support everybody, and everybody has a place in the world. Like I said, everyone has a space. And so we need to kind of help everyone. It's I suppose the difference between a nurturing society and a society that just decides, well, this is kind of how I want everyone to be. This is a very narrow set of criteria. And so I don't think until you actually get into the world of work, you realize just how diverse that is. I don't know how many different types of skills and jobs are available in the world of archaeology.
Yeah,
I would imagine huge.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So we need all of that But I think if, we're not harnessing a really quite a big section of society, then that's a problem. Because if you want, we can always have a look as well of the actual, I suppose, signs of ADHD and autism, and then look at it as, well, actually, how can that be a strength? Yes, it can also be hindrance, but it can also be a strength. And let's kind of grow towards that. Let's look at what we can do rather than what we can't do.
Can we just, I think it's probably a good opportunity now just to, because we've only got sort of 10 minutes or so left. So let's just clarify and talk about some of the traits that define ADHD and autism. Kathy, can we do that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, so let's start with ADHD then. Obviously, I've got ADHD. I'm pretty sure my kids have got ADHD. It's everywhere. I understand it from my perspective. So for somebody who's listening who isn't sure if they've got ADHD or if somebody they know or can care about, what are the sort of main signs that you'd point to help, not necessarily diagnose, but just to help them understand?
Yeah, so the kind of, I suppose the list is very general because we've all got aspects of this, but it's more when they all start adding up together. So signs of inattention, and that's kind of struggling to pay attention, difficulty kind of like following through on tasks, kind of completion, often forgetting kind of responsibilities. So that can be, forgetting to do certain chores or things at home, or even forgetting to kind of turn in that piece of work, that homework.
Yeah.
Maybe making what might seem as careless mistakes, but again, it's because your attention's not switching the tap off, leaving the tap running in the bathroom, or not reading the last page of a test or something like that. Stuff that you would kind of kick yourself for afterwards. And then potentially coming across as being quite disorganized and that might be kind of losing things. You put your keys down in a different place each time and never quite knowing what coat pocket they're in, stuff like that. Yeah, so that's the other thing. So
familiar, all of that.
Yeah. So that's more inattention. And then you have kind of more for the hyperactivity side of things. So you've got, obviously, the obvious one is difficulty sitting still. Fidgeting, can often feel quite restless, kind of constant motor, keeping running. Difficulty waiting a turn, sitting in a queue of traffic is quite challenging. And potentially being quite over talking or finishing someone else's sentences, or being kind of quite quick and in there, But there's an awful lot of other things that kind of get missed but don't necessarily come up on the list that you would go through if you were to be diagnosed. So things like sleep, there's a lot of comorbidities like dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, that kind of stuff. Often they're common bedfellows, and then things like emotional regulation as well. I think that is something that scores quite highly, But I think, again, this still can fit into some really positive things about ADHD and autism, So dysregulation, they call it dysregulation of emotion, but actually, that is really a very strong sense of fairness or, things not being okay.
What's it called? Justice sensitivity? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, stuff like that. So, but actually, if something's making you angry and you're really cross about something, I think we forget that anger's actually it's an action emotion. It actually drives us to act. And so if you think about it, if you've got a really strong desire and motivation to act on something that you think is wrong, then that's where we get a sense of justice and kind of, I wonder if that's part of our society making up of what's okay and not okay, what's right and wrong in the world.
You know what? That must have been one of the biggest driving factors in human history. That I want to change that. This is wrong. I don't like this.
Exactly. Yeah. And then if you think about, emotional, again, linking into when people say, oh, that I'm too much, I have too much emotion, I have too big a reaction to things. Actually, empathy is a fantastic skill, or at least, superpower to have. I find a lot of people driven, who kind of find themselves in this world often are also strong empaths. They really link in with, people's, struggles, and you'll find that a lot of people who are ADHD also find themselves in the world of counselling, either therapists themselves or coaches of some sort, or actually in a helping type profession, that taps into their skills. So, but we need empathy to also back up that strong sense of fairness, so, to kind of really kind of look after our, the people who are struggling or need a bit more help, or, I often find, again, it's a huge generalization, but generally the first one to come to my aid is often they have ADHD, if I'm in the street, and they're quite happy to step out and say, "You okay?"
It's a really difficult thing, that is, Kathy. When you see somebody, especially in a busy city, and you can see they're upset, that impulse to go over and comfort them and ask if they're okay, or if there's anything you can do, it's difficult to hold back. But obviously, I don't know, 9 times out of 10 seems a bit excessive, but a lot of the times people don't want you to. They don't know you. You're just a stranger. It's a different, and you take that with you. Because one thing I've noticed is that in those situations, I'll go away and I'll say, right, no, they don't want me to go over. It would be weird if I went over, and it would be inappropriate and uncomfortable, and they may get angry at me or judge me negatively. But then you take that with you, and you carry that around, that feeling that you should have helped, you should have done something, and you feel sorry for that person. It's
then doesn't that kind of point towards, again, you can educate me, George, on this, that really we're not built to live in cities. We're built to live in smaller communities. We've only got the capacity in our brains for... Is it 200
odd people or something like that?
Absolutely. So generally you wouldn't have to come in contact with so many strangers. You would literally be kind of that strong sense to kind of support and help your community, or your kind of your fellow like neighbours or tribe or whatever, that would have been okay, because you wouldn't have been a stranger or as much of a stranger in that kind of community. Whereas in the city, we're in a very different environment.
Absolutely. I mean, that might just be a really interesting sort of, I don't know if it's evolution in action, but how quickly civilizations have blossomed and the human population has rocketed. Our nervous systems and genetically, we haven't caught up with that yet. So the argument, going back to the hunter-farmer theory of we are unsuited, predominantly, but not exclusively, we are, a lot of neurodivergent people suffer or suffocate in education and workplace. And that may just be another facet to that we haven't caught up with. That we don't know that our subconscious brain, whatever part of us that generates empathy, hasn't caught up. It hasn't, to the point where it screams at us, help these people, do something to change that. But of course we can't. We're not all in a position to do anything to help. So the knock-on effect of that is you feel poorly about yourself because you didn't help, or you couldn't help, or they didn't want you to help. So there's a rejection element to it. It's quite complicated, I suppose, if you get into it.
Well, I suppose because we have a drive and need to belong. We survive in groups. That's how we, we've got that empathy gene, which is why, when one person yawns, everyone else around them yawns as well. We're essentially pack animals, and we survive by helping each other out. And so when we're kind of in a position that we're being, societally kind of conditioned that, no, we can't step in and we can't get involved or helped, or, we're worried about their negative reaction, it kind of jars a bit, doesn't it? It doesn't actually sit with how we maybe would like to be. We want to help. It's a strong driving force in being human.
And I wonder if that sort of triggers that desire for a better world in general.
Yeah, which goes back to that kind of fairness, and so it's great because, I wonder if you look at anybody who's been a campaigner or a force for change, I wonder how much they've also have a propensity to be ADHD and autistic as well. I wonder, but, problem solving, it goes really hand in hand with dyslexia. That whole idea of being very visual and having kind of like being able to put things in 3D in your brain, and then, add that with risk, add that with impulsivity, add that with good in an emergency, add that with, a high sense of, unfairness, add that with high energy, if you're hyperactive as well, add a bit more hyper-focus in there, sensory seeking, like if you really want to kind of get your hands in there, gosh, all of this, and doing it for a really kind of like positive reason, the empathy side of things, they all are really fantastic drivers to making the world a better place, making your community a better place, So I'm not suggesting everyone with ADHD and autism are, wonderfully good citizens and perfect and kind, because obviously, again, we're all so different. And yet, I would say in the main, that's the superpower of ADHD. It has the potential to be such a positive force in the community for lots of reasons that I've just described.
Absolutely. And I think the way you beautifully described the various aspects and traits of ADHD, and you could almost imagine if we had the ability to use the dials on them all, so we could turn up the hyperfocus a little bit or bring it down a little bit, and turn the empathy up or down, and create an idealized ADHD. It's not possible from a place of ignorance and in difficult circumstances, but also I think if you look at it in a different way, there's a possibility to encourage and improve and come to understand. So you can make yourself feel like a better person, or enjoy the experience more, or be more useful in terms of being a citizen or problem solving. But also equally, I think if anybody's really suffered, so we talked earlier about, I am conscious of time actually, but if we talked earlier about the unfortunate slippery path from school to prison. Nobody with ADHD asked to be ADHD. This is a massive story. We inherited these genes and our place in the world and the state of the world. That came down to us. We didn't ask for anything, the environment or the genes, but here we are. And I think I've struggled. I've made mistakes, and I think that there's a really positive idea here in you can alter certain aspects of your condition, and because a lot of it is raw energy and potential, and if it's in the wrong environment, or if it was in the wrong environment, or in a challenging, difficult circumstance, and the energy went maladaptive. Unfortunately, that happens, but that's not the end of the road. There's still ways of.
I think a lot of that's to do with understanding and having people around you that are understanding. So if you could kind of also, I'm going to go back to a couple of your points, which was, you did say, like kind of turn the dials up and down a little bit, which would be fantastic. And I think we could all do with a bit of that at times, however, that doesn't give us the opportunity for mistakes. It doesn't give us the opportunity to come across things inadvertently. If we control it too much, I think it then gives us a very narrow, again, it will take us only as far as our own kind of knowledge and creativity will take us. But if we actually inadvertently, and I'm going to use this again, too much, or we have too much of a response, actually we suddenly then come across something that we didn't set out to do or try or be or find, and but actually we have the opportunity for mistakes to happen, and actually we learn an awful lot from mistakes. We learn an awful lot about ourselves, about our environment, our community. I would imagine a lot of science breakthroughs are on mistakes as well, from what I can gather, the whole kind of penicillin story. So, again, I think we have to really be open to, we're not perfect. None of us are. And this is everybody under the title human. We all have things that we feel we could do more of and less of. We all wish that we were whatever and less of the other, so it's about allowing us to be who we are. And I come back to this, where do we fit in the world? What's our reason for being here? So it almost sounds a little bit kind of spiritual, but I think that is really important. We all have a place. We all have something that we link into another cog to get the world moving and keep the world moving.
We're all supposed to be here, regardless of what you believe. We are here, therefore we are supposed to be here. And you are who you are because you inherited those genes and born into that environment.
Exactly. We all have value.
Absolutely, really wise as ever, Kathy. Kathy, I'm afraid we have run out of time, so we're going to have to pick this up another time. But thank you so much for coming on. I hope you enjoyed it, and carry on doing what you're doing, please.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.